For the first quarter of a minute, we delve into the enigma concealed beneath old-world timber. Allow me to share something extraordinary, something that, by all accounts, should not exist. Across the European landscape, within hushed cathedrals and forgotten strongholds, lie wooden planks that have outlasted entire dynasties. Floors have borne the weight of countless steps for 7 centuries. Doors have maintained their integrity long after their iron fixtures corroded into rust-coloured dust. And pathways have endured tempests, sieges, and innumerable cold downpours without ever distorting, warping, or succumbing to rot. Journey beneath the stone vaults of Norway's Nidaros Cathedral, and you will still discover oak planks in the subterranean chambers that have remained sound after 750 years of damp underground air. Travel southward to France's Château de Montaigne, and you will observe defensive wooden hoardings, once exposed to incessant winds and sun. Contemporary assessments show deep veins of tannin still permeating their fibres, as if the wood itself had been engineered for longevity. Yet, here lies the true paradox. These boards persist longer than medieval plaster, longer than some masonry, even longer than the iron nails intended to secure them. How could mere timber outlive materials ostensibly much more robust? The truth is disquieting. Medieval artisans were not handling ordinary wood. They were fortifying it, subtly, methodically, and with procedures so confidential that they nearly vanished from human collective memory. In their era, knowledge equated to power, and the techniques that conferred durability upon good timber were never documented. They were spoken in hushed tones, demonstrated and guarded. Today, we unveil that secret. To comprehend the ingenuity of their approach, we must first grasp the inherent vulnerability of untreated wood. Freshly felled timber, referred to by medieval builders as green wood, contained between 40% and 200% moisture, depending on the tree species and the season. Within each plank, microscopic water pockets fostered instability, and as moisture dissipated unevenly, internal pressures mounted. Gaps appeared, the grain warped, and surfaces cupped or split. Now, envision this delicate material situated within the harsh climate of medieval Europe. Extended periods of freezing winters, roofs that exhaled smoke rather than expelling it, walls that retained humidity, and floors laid directly over earth that perpetually emitted moisture. Fungi thrived, and insects proliferated. An untreated board had virtually no chance of survival. This is corroborated by archaeological findings. Anglo-Saxon hall houses, whose constructors left timber in its unprocessed state, seldom endured in a functional condition for more than 50 to 80 years. Even in sheltered environments, their beams softened, disintegrated, or warped irrevocably. Wood, at its essence, is a living substance, continuously reacting to temperature and humidity fluctuations. Without intervention, without stabilization, it cannot endure for centuries. And yet, some boards did. They outlasted 4 generations of monarchs. They outlived entire architectural trends. They remained steadfast, even as the surrounding stone crumbled. This implies that someone, somewhere, modified the fundamental properties of the material itself. Medieval artisans lacked laboratories, microscopes, or chemistry treatises. What they possessed was patience, keen observation skills, and the capacity to identify recurring patterns over extended periods. Gradually, they began to notice an anomaly. Timber stored near the rafters of smoke-filled kitchens rarely developed mold. Wood that spent weeks immersed in tannin-rich streams near forests emerged darker, denser, and remarkably impervious to insects. Planks stacked adjacent to leather tanning workshops absorbed vapors that seemed to harden their fibers and deter worms. None of this was mystical. It was empirical. When one works with wood daily, one learns its characteristics, its vulnerabilities, and the specific conditions that alter its behavior. Slowly, a hypothesis started to coalesce within the guilds. If smoke could preserve meat and leather, why not timber? If tannin could transform animal hides into armor-like leather, could it similarly transform wood? If warm, moist fibers could be shaped before they dried, could an impending warp be averted before it manifested? The association between tanners, who understood the potency of tannins, and carpenters, who comprehended the life cycle of wood, laid the groundwork for an unplanned collaboration. This partnership would lead to the creation of Europe's first true engineered wood. This knowledge was not documented. It was not openly disseminated. It was a craft secret, gained through apprenticeship, safeguarded by vows, and imparted only to those deemed worthy. What they subsequently uncovered would enable wooden boards to defy the passage of time. When medieval artisans finally began synthesizing their observations, one substance emerged as central to their discovery: tannin. It was ubiquitous, provided one knew where to look for it. In the rugged bark of ancient oak trees, in the resilient skin of chestnut trees, in the dark husks of walnuts, and even in the weathered foliage that fell in autumn. For most people of that era, tannin was merely a part of the natural environment. However, for tanners, it was the key to converting animal hides into durable, armor-like leather. And for attentive woodworkers, it offered a means of transforming fragile timber into something entirely different. Modern science now elucidates what medieval minds intuitively perceived centuries ago. Tannins are potent polyphenols capable of forming hydrogen bonds with lignin, the natural adhesive that binds wood fibers together. Once these bonds are established, the fibers no longer slide past each other as readily. The wood stiffens. More importantly, tannins displace free water within the cells. With less water to expand and contract, the wood becomes stable, predictable, and significantly less susceptible to cracking. But the transformation doesn't end there. Tannins also render cellulose, the structural framework of wood, far more challenging for fungi and insects to digest. What would ordinarily be a feast for decay-causing organisms becomes an unappetizing, chemically fortified barrier. Material scientists examining medieval boards today clearly observe the results. Tests indicate a 12% to 40% increase in the modulus of elasticity, meaning treated boards resist bending considerably better than untreated ones. Shrinkage during drying decreases by 20% to 30%, drastically reducing warping, and fungal penetration is slowed by up to 70%. Explaining why some boards persisted in cold, humid cathedrals for centuries. Whether medieval craftsmen comprehended the underlying chemistry is immaterial. What truly matters is that, through patience and practice, they learned that tannin could elevate wood from a vulnerable biological material into a rudimentary yet remarkably effective form of engineered wood, centuries before the term was coined. Once the efficacy of tannin was acknowledged, the guilds perfected a ritual to deeply infuse it into the core of each board. Initially, apprentices collected armfuls of oak bark, thick, pungent, and rich in polyphenols. These were then boiled for hours in large iron cauldrons until the water transformed into a dark, astringent solution known as black liquor. The aroma was sharp, earthy, almost metallic. To a carpenter of that period, it was the scent of resilience. Boards were then submerged into these vats, occasionally weighted with stones to prevent them from floating. Thin planks might soak for 3 days, while thicker beams remained immersed for up to 2 full weeks. Underneath the surface, a quiet transformation was taking place. The hot liquid expanded the microscopic pores within the wood, creating pathways that allowed tannin to penetrate far beyond the surface. It permeated like dye through fabric, colouring the fibres from within and chemically altering the structure at a microscopic level. Archaeologists studying preserved boards from medieval chateaux in France have identified tannin penetration bands reaching 4 to 6 millimeters deep, considerably exceeding what simple surface staining could achieve. The alteration was not merely chemical, it was physical as well. Soaked boards became heavier, often by 10% to 20%, as tannin replaced water and occupied empty spaces within the cells. Craftsmen recognized this increased weight by touch. A heavy board was a strong board. By the time each plank was removed from the vat, dripping and darkened, it had already undergone a fundamental change. However, it was only halfway through its metamorphosis. The subsequent stage would transpire not in water, but in smoke. At the periphery of many medieval workshops stood a modest, unassuming structure. Its walls were stone, its roof low and sturdy, and a slender wisp of smoke frequently emerged from its vents. This was the smoke curing room, a rudimentary but remarkably efficient low-heat kiln that the guilds relied upon to complete their work. Inside, the air shimmered with a gentle warmth, never hot enough to char the wood, but consistently warm enough to expel the last vestiges of moisture. The fires that heated the room were kept low and smouldering, utilizing hardwood scraps and damp chips to generate dense, aromatic smoke. The stone walls absorbed the heat and released it gradually, establishing a stable environment of approximately 40 to 60 degrees Celsius, the ideal temperature range for drying wood without causing it to crack. And the smoke itself held the true secret. Modern analysis reveals that wood smoke contains phenols, natural antimicrobial agents that permeate the outer fibers and eradicate fungi before they can take root. It also carries aldehydes, which react with cellulose to form subtle crosslinks, tightening the structure just as tanning fortified linen. Collectively, these chemicals create a thin but resilient protective skin, what researchers sometimes refer to as the microchar effect, a semi-hardened layer that repels moisture and retards decay. Samples obtained from the ancient storage facilities of the Hanseatic League and the lower levels of Nidaro's cathedral reveal extraordinarily high concentrations of phenolic residues on the surfaces of centuries-old timber. These unequivocally indicate intentional smoke curing, rather than accidental exposure to culinary fires. It was a controlled process, carried out in a specialized kiln. Within these dark, smoky confines, weeks of gradual drying and chemical impregnation transformed each plank to its ultimate state. When artisans eventually retrieved these boards, solid, straight, and imbued with a smoky aroma, they were confident the wood would endure. It had been fortified, stabilized, and shielded against the ravages of time. What emerged from those kilns was more than just raw timber. It was wood meticulously crafted through experience, chemically enhanced, and preserved by hands that appreciated the essence of patience. 7. Straightening while pliable, the unacknowledged procedure. By the time a board exited its tannin bath and the smoke-curing chamber, it possessed increased strength, but remained susceptible to one final adversary: its inherent memory. Wood consistently attempts to revert to the form it held when first cut. Consequently, craftsmen understood the necessity of influencing the board's ultimate form before it fully dried. There existed a brief period when the moisture content dropped to approximately 30 to 40%, during which cellulose exhibited properties akin to soft rubber, flexible, pliant, and amenable to shaping. In this critical interval, master carpenters intervened. They meticulously straightened each plank, applying compression clamps along the edges to rectify twists, inserting wooden wedges beneath the convex side of a warped board, and affixing temporary holding pins to maintain alignment. These implements were rudimentary, yet the underlying technique demanded a trained eye. A single misadjustment could permanently embed a flaw. A precise one could guarantee structural integrity for centuries. This particular step rarely appears in surviving documents. It is referenced only in fragmented notes within the ancient Zun Guild archives, cryptic allusions to guiding the warm board or pinning the grain to its rightful path. Such secrecy is logical, for the process was transformative. Once a board fully dried in its corrected configuration, it would resist reverting to its original shape, maintaining its linearity through gales, winters, and the enduring strain of time. This covert practice, performed discreetly in the aftermath of smoke curing, represented one of the most closely guarded secrets of medieval woodworking. It explains why, even today, some of these boards lie perfectly flat, as if untouched by the centuries that sought to distort them. 8. When both methods combined, a medieval composite material. Individually, each technique was potent. However, when medieval artisans integrated tannin saturation, smoke curing, and meticulous straightening, the outcome ceased to be mere wood. It evolved into something akin to a semi-composite material, engineered not by machinery, but by patient hands, and an intuitive grasp of chemistry long before the discipline itself was named. Contemporary material scientists now liken the characteristics of these treated boards to engineered wood products such as LVL, CLT, and heat-treated thermo-modified timber. These are materials designed specifically to resist deformation, bending, and decay. Yet, medieval boards, fabricated in workshops illuminated by candles and hearth fires, manifest many of these same attributes. The tannin stiffened the internal matrix. Smoke curing fortified the surface and mitigated biological infestation. Straightening secured the grain in position before the material's structure fully solidified. The craftsmen who devised these processes did not conceive of molecules, microstructures, or polymer bonds. Their focus was on outcomes, enduring strength, true-to-form planks, and materials that would not fail the builder years later. Their method was unhurried, arduous, almost contemplative. Nevertheless, the result was nothing short of extraordinary. Unwittingly, they forged the closest approximation the medieval world had to engineered wood, a material enhanced at multiple levels both internally and externally. It was a material capable of bearing weight, resisting moisture, and defying time in ways crude timber never could. 9. Where strengthened boards were used, high-value components. Given the substantial time and expertise required, these reinforced boards were reserved for applications where failure was simply an unacceptable outcome. In the grand halls of medieval castles, they formed the flooring that bore the weight of nobles, soldiers, and entire feasts. In towering cathedrals, they provided support for galleries and choir lofts, areas where ordinary wood would have distorted under seasonal shifts. They constituted the stairs and robust doors of stone keeps, elements demanding absolute dimensional stability. Along the defensive perimeters of fortresses, they were fashioned into hoardings, wooden walkways projecting beyond castle walls. These boards endured relentless rain, scorching sun, and the weight of armed defenders. Yet, those found in castles across France and Germany have persisted for 4 to 6 centuries, preserved by the very techniques their creators kept confidential. And at sea, the method proved equally valuable. The Hanseatic League, masters of medieval commerce, constructed ships with decks exposed to salt spray, frigid winds, and constant abrasion. Archaeological timber samples from these trading vessels exhibit tannin-infused fibers and smoke-cured surfaces, empirical evidence that the same strengthening techniques were applied to maritime construction. These were the planks that formed bridges within castles, the surfaces soldiers traversed in conflict, and the platforms where provisions were stored high above damp stone. Anywhere the repercussions of structural failure would have been ruinous, medieval builders employed treated wood. In those locations, even today, the boards remain, not because the trees were inherently stronger, but because the hands that shaped them understood how to instill strength before time could erode it. 10. Why guilds protected the method like a weapon. For medieval artisans, knowledge was more than a mere implement. It was currency, identity, and, in many instances, the sole safeguard for their trade in a fiercely competitive world. Thus, upon discovering a means to render wood more durable than stone, this technique immediately became a cherished secret. It was never explicitly documented, never shared beyond the confines of a guild hall, and certainly never disclosed to outsiders who could jeopardize their livelihood. Consider the economic advantage. A carpenter whose boards lasted for decades, even centuries, could command higher compensation, secure long-term patronage from lords and abbeys, and cultivate a reputation that elevated his entire workshop. A guild possessing the knowledge to produce such superior timber would naturally defend that secret with the same tenacity that blacksmiths guarded their forging recipes or masons protected their mortar mixtures. And inter-guild rivalry was a palpable reality. Cities frequently vied for prestige, builders travelled, and rival craftsmen emulated anything they could observe. Therefore, the most secure techniques were those that no outsider could discern, even when directly observing the finished product. However, there was another rationale for this silence: punishment. Many guilds enforced secrecy with severe repercussions, including expulsion, fines, or, in extreme cases, physical harm. Within these organizations, loyalty was paramount. Violating an oath signified a betrayal not merely of a craft, but of a lineage. The vestiges of this secrecy endure. In manuscripts like the Hausbuch des Wolfegg, woodworking procedures are described in remarkable detail, with the notable exception of timber treatment. This omission is deliberate. Instructions mysteriously jump from raw boards to final assembly without elucidating how the wood was stabilized. To a medieval apprentice, the missing step would have been obvious, but to us today, it stands as a silent testament to a technique intentionally concealed. This constituted the essence of an invisible methodology. No charred surface, no resin coating, no unusual tools, just wood that, inexplicably, resisted the passage of time. Outsiders could replicate everything they observed and still never reproduce the results. 11. Archaeological rediscovery. How modern science reconstructed the method. For centuries, historians hypothesized that medieval boards survived simply because the trees were superior, the climate was colder, or the builders were somehow fortunate. However, as modern science progressed, researchers eventually focused their attention on the wood itself, and what they uncovered dispelled all doubt. These medieval boards were not natural marvels. They were chemically modified materials, engineered long before the concept of engineering existed. The breakthrough occurred when archaeologists began utilizing LC-MS, or liquid chromatography-mass spectrometry, to analyze the chemical signatures of ancient timber. In sample after sample, from cathedrals, fortresses, and shipwrecks, the instruments detected unusually high levels of polyphenols, far exceeding what would be present in untreated wood. These polyphenols matched the signature of tannins derived from oak bark, chestnut, and walnut husks. It was the first scientific validation that medieval craftsmen had deliberately infused tannin deep into the grain. However, LCMS yielded only a partial account. Under a scanning electron microscope, SEM, researchers observed a thin, hardened layer on the surface, a residue formed by centuries of smoke exposure. This layer contained minute phenolic films, a clear indication of slow, controlled smoke curing. These were not random cooking fumes or accidental exposure to hearth smoke. They were the consequence of intentional, kiln-like environments. To complete the picture, scientists employed FTIR spectroscopy, a method that examines molecular bonds. FTIR unveiled something extraordinary. The cellulose in these boards contained cross-linked structures, meaning the fibers had been chemically stabilized by aldehydes from smoke and tannins during treatment. In essence, the wood had been molecularly transformed into a more rigid, more durable version of itself. The consensus among archaeological material experts was absolute and unequivocal. The wood had undergone chemical alteration, not natural preservation, serendipitous survival, or some mystical, timeless selection. It was intentionally, systematically, and expertly modified by hands comprehending how to collaborate with nature rather than defy it. This find did not inadvertently resurrect a forgotten method. It brought back one of the earliest forms of engineered material ever developed by humanity. 12. How contemporary survivalists can replicate this method today. Anyone possessing patience and a desire to produce lumber that will outlast their descendants can accurately reproduce this medieval procedure. It requires no chemicals, no factories, and no specialized equipment. Only time, heat, and the same fundamental materials our predecessors utilized. Initiate the process by gathering approximately 3 kilograms of oak bark or other tannin-rich material for every 20 liters of water. Simmer this mixture for 3 to 4 hours, allowing the liquid to transform into a dark, potent brew. Subsequently, fully submerge your rough-cut boards beneath the surface. Thin planks might only require 5 days, whereas thicker stock benefits from 10 days of immersion. The water will penetrate the wood, enlarging its pores and drawing the tannin deep within, just as it did centuries ago. Next comes smoke curing. Construct a small enclosure. Even a rudimentary metal drum with vent holes will suffice. Burn hardwood scraps that generate cool, dense smoke. Maintain a gentle heat for 1 to 2 weeks, rotating the boards periodically. This stage gradually expels moisture, coats the surface with antimicrobial phenols, and fortifies the cellulose. If slight warping becomes evident early on, correct it using clamps or wedges while the wood remains pliable. There are instances when this technique should not be employed, particularly in environments exposed to intense direct sunlight. Wood dried too rapidly will crack before the tannin and smoke have a chance to stabilize it. However, in shaded, well-ventilated areas, the transformation is profound. The practical applications for homesteaders and survivalists are boundless. Cabin floors that resist swelling after heavy downpours, tool benches that endure humidity, stair treads and doors that maintain their integrity through winter freeze-thaw cycles. Even the decking of small wooden boats benefits from this treatment, gaining resilience without the need for chemical coatings. Perhaps its greatest advantage lies in its purity. No toxins, no synthetic preservatives, merely wood strengthened by time-honored principles and nature's own chemistry. This is more than a technique, it is a philosophy, a means to construct for a future extending beyond one's own lifespan, precisely as medieval craftspeople once did. 13. The philosophy of medieval engineering. Strength preceding assembly. Reflecting on the methodologies of medieval artisans reveals that their paramount achievement was not merely the fortified wood they created, but the underlying philosophy that guided their every action. They held an unwavering conviction that strength must be established before construction, not after a failure. In their view, a board was either prepared to last for centuries or destined for decay within decades. There was no middle ground. This mindset permeated everything. A carpenter did not rush. He observed the seasons. He prepared timber months, sometimes years, before the first joint was ever carved. The lengthy rituals of soaking, smoking, and rectifying were not perceived as impediments, but as investments. And what they acquired was time. Time measured not in years, but in generations. Their structures were designed to provide shelter for grandchildren, not just clients. Their materials were fashioned to withstand storms yet to form, and winters that might arrive long after their own passing. Contrast this with the present day. Our modern world often prioritizes speed above all else. Build fast, use fast, replace fast. Entire industries revolve around short lifespans and disposable solutions. And within this cycle, we have quietly forgotten a truth our ancestors lived by. Durability is not accidental. It is a deliberate choice made long before a structure stands, and honoured long after the builder has departed. The medieval philosophy was straightforward yet potent. Prepare the material thoroughly, and the material will outlast you. Neglect that preparation, and you will spend your life mending what should have endured on its own. It is a lesson worth remembering, especially now. 14. Why this forgotten method holds relevance today. As the world evolves, the wisdom of the past unexpectedly gains value. Today's climate is hotter and more humid in many regions, creating conditions where modern untreated wood deteriorates more rapidly than ever. Fungi proliferate, moisture lingers, and even pressure-treated boards fail well before their advertised lifespan. In essence, our timber has never encountered a more hostile environment. Concurrently, new movements are emerging: homesteading, off-grid living, and cabin construction using natural materials. Individuals seeking independence from industrial supply chains desire wood that endures, without chemicals, without toxins, and without costly treatments. And as lumber prices continue to escalate, longevity transforms from a mere preference into a financial imperative. Every additional decade a board survives means a decade you are not compelled to replace it. This is where the medieval method truly excels. Tannin combined with smoke, a simple, ancient pairing, proves to be an ideal solution for contemporary challenges. It stabilizes wood without electricity, preserves it without poison, and hardens it without machinery. It is sustainable, accessible, and remarkably effective. The technique is not an artifact. It is a blueprint for a future where craftsmanship converges with resilience, where ancient chemistry resolves modern dilemmas, and where the measured wisdom of the past finally returns to guide a swift and fragile age. 15. Conclusion. The silent technology that outlived empires. When you traverse a medieval hall and touch a plank that has endured 5, 6, or even 8 centuries, you are engaging with more than just timber. You are connecting with the result of patient labor, disciplined knowledge, and a philosophy that prioritized permanence over expediency. These boards are not fortunate survivors. They are evidence, calm, indisputable evidence, that strength can be engineered using nothing more than bark, smoke, time, and skill. This narrative is not about archaic wood. It is about ancient wisdom, about artisans who worked deliberately, not because they lacked alternatives, but because they comprehended that anything truly worth constructing deserved to last. And now the choice reverts to us. We can allow these techniques to vanish into the annals of history, or we can revive them, adapt them, and build structures intended to span generations, just as they once did. The knowledge awaits, the materials are straightforward, and the invitation is extended. Reinvigorate this forgotten technology, and you may find that the greatest strength of all was never the wood itself, but the insight of those who understood how to prepare it.